Joined right now by Rolling Stone contributing editor and National Magazine Award winner Matt Taibbi on his new book, Hate Incorporated. He's in town. You did an appearance, right? But you're just hanging around?
Yeah, just for an extra day. But I was in Berkeley yesterday.
Yeah?
Speech. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What'd you talk about?
Well, the book's about the media. It's kind of about the sort of vitriolic, hyper-slanted nature of the press. And I grew up in the press. My father was a reporter, so I've been around the business now almost 50 years. And the business has changed a lot over the decades. And
How?
Well,
what's the most notable change that somebody that, Rumpelstiltskin wakes up and sees today, other than the venue that they get it?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, the first thing is, back 60s, 70s, and before, the commercial strategy of most news media stations was to go for the entire audience. You think about Lowell Thomas when he was with CBS. Good evening, everybody was the strategy, right? And they had that kind of monotone, neutral delivery, for anchors. Nowadays, everybody's using the Fox strategy, which is we're not going to get the whole audience, so let's go for a demographic and dominate it by feeding them news that we know that they're going to like. Right? So we're crafting news programs for specific demographics. Fox goes for conservatives, older white conservatives, and MSNBC and CNN are going for a different kind of professional class Democrats, and they're just giving them news of a certain type, and they're not showing them another thing. And so this has created, I think, a big problem in the news business because nobody's getting the same set of facts anymore, and people are basically getting a lot of information about groups they don't like, and it's creating a divisiveness.
Wasn't there a subtle form of that in the 22-minute newscast of Walter Cronkite when he says that's the way it is? I mean, isn't there bias in the stories that you don't put in?
Of course, yeah, but I think I actually write about and that's the way it is in the book, and I think that's also a big change because that idea, what Cronkite was saying to his audience, is that it's okay to stop watching the news until tomorrow. We don't have that anymore. Now we want you to keep watching and keep clicking all day long. Never stop watching news. Never stop consuming. Cable wants you to go from one program to the next, the 24-hour news cycle. Yes, absolutely. The old news broadcast left out a lot of things, but they had starkly different habits, and they expected their audiences to behave very differently than they do now. Now we want you on all day long. If you're not watching TV, we want you on your phone all day long, and people do have like an addictive relationship to this, and it's very, very unhealthy.
Yeah, it's funny, maybe even slightly ironic that sports fans, okay, they know what's true and authentic, and they gravitate, and if it's not, they're so knowledgeable. I actually think sports talk radio is the hardest, much harder than this. You get something wrong in there, you lose all credibility forever. Right. Willie Mays batted 321 that season, right? And they become that fixated and focused, right? Mm-hmm. I wonder, is there some way to get the rest of America to realize that they have skin in the game and that they have to be more discerning about the information that they're processing? Yeah,
no, that's a really interesting point. I actually talk about that in the book too. we are trying to train the news companies are trying to train news audiences to behave like sports fans. In fact, if you watch election coverage, they steal the format straight from like NFL Sunday Countdown. Right. The sets look the same. Election coverage looks the same. They have a magic number for delegates. Like we use the same jargon. Debate coverage, it's all boxing language. But sports fans are way more knowledgeable about sports than news audiences are about politics. And also the reporters are better in sports. Like they challenge the owners and the players and the coaches much more than they do challenge.
Is it possible that the reason that is because sports is a very there's no ties. There's a winner loser. It's very what's the word? Binary or that's not the word I'm looking for, but you know what I'm trying to say. Dualistic. It's one of two things. Where life is 10 divided by 3. There's no real answer. You can go down that rabbit hole forever.
Well, I agree with you, but we are you watch the news programs. They are trying to create that kind of dualistic binary picture. They, if you open up a newspaper or watch the news, there's only two realities that they show. There's Democrats and Republicans. They don't show non-voters. They don't show anarchists. They don't show people. Right. You are one or the other, and we want audiences to have a rooting interest in one side or the other. And I think that's totally unhealthy and unrealistic also. I mean, the real divide in this country is really between rich people and everybody else, and you don't see that on TV. You see left and right, blue and red, and it's kind of an artificial picture of reality, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. Rolling Stone as a kid growing up was – I loved it. I was a musician. It was such a cool collection of insight into people that you want to know, people that you revered. But when did Wenner start to make it more political? When do you know what was there a tipping point?
Well, Jan, who I know very well, he from the very start, part of his vision of the magazine was to kind of fuse the political sensibility of young audiences who were interested in both music and in politics at the time.
Which they were
Woodstock.
at the 60s and it was early 70s.
Yeah, it was very much the same thing, and he kind of understood that it was a sensibility in addition to the music. He didn't want to just have a niche magazine about music, and also he very early on hired writers who had a kind of broad-minded view of everything. Like Hunter Thompson was there very early. Later he had P.G. O'Rourke. He had all these people. And so that was always part of his sensibility. He's very political himself. I think that's has part to do with his personality. But I think it was a lot of what made the magazine work over the years. Is that it wasn't just a music magazine.
Yeah. It is. I think we had the Summer of Love here. The last year and a half now, 2 years now, and just the celebration of culture and music and politics. It's so much has changed since the 90s when we had this ability now, to take an MP3 that and turn it into, a 10. It could populate itself,
right? And
the artists no longer had control of their message, and I think a lot of that has happened too with politicians. You focus groups. Who is the person talking to me now, and what is their real message? You call your book Hate Incorporated. That sounds really cynical.
Well, yeah, no, I think the business has become very cynical. I mean, when I was coming up through journalism, most people who went into the business, they went into it because they had, some idealism about sort of telling the truth, about educating readers. They wanted to find out about the world, educate their audiences. Now, the big corporate news media is a consumer business just like any other consumer business. And what we're really doing is we're selling people their own frustrations and anger. And every day if you tune into cable news, 24 hours a day we're showing you something that somebody else is doing to you, right? If you watch MSNBC, it's all about the Republicans who are doing all these terrible things and they're colluding with Russians. If you watch Fox, it's all about the liberals. They're out to get you. They're in league with the terrorists, blah, blah, blah. And this is a commercial strategy that they figured out that works pretty well. It makes a lot of money, and I think it's very cynical. It's different from what it used to be in the business.
It has to be changed organically, though, right? Legislation and politicians aren't going to – again, that's what the thing with Facebook that worries me.
Yeah, no, I agree.
In the hearings, is that, sure, okay, nobody likes a meme that is lying – and it is destructive, and people are sending it, and the vitriol grows and grows and grows. But the answer is worse than the problem. The solution is.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think what's going to happen is that people will organically leave those traditional news programs, and they're going to find some other source to flock to. I mean, you already see shows like Joe Rogan's show and Jimmy Dore's show.
Right.
Like they're more powerful than CBS and NBC. Some of these independent people, because the audience just don't trust us in the traditional media the way they used to. And I agree with the Facebook thing. Like, you can't legislate out that kind of stuff, and you can't put a star chamber in charge of deciding what's true and what isn't. I think that has to be left up to audiences.
Rolling Stone contributing editor and National Magazine Award winner Matt Taibbi, nice enough to join us in here. He stayed in town extra day after a speech in Berkeley. Impeachment, obviously, is everybody's talking about this today. I'll tell you how cynical I am, right? Mm-hmm. I really believe that I think there's actually a slow movement in the Senate with Republican senators, the gang of 20 that they need to get 67 votes. If they see it in their self-interest, they would do it. I don't believe he would leave. I believe you would have to drag him down Pennsylvania Avenue like a urine-stained sofa cushion. He's not going to leave on his own volition, because as soon as he walks out of there, New York and Manhattan hit him with indictments. And,
Maybe. So I covered Trump's presidential campaign, and from the beginning, I think it was pretty clear that he had no intention of winning. Like, right. It was kind of a publicity stunt. I think he didn't have a ground game at all for most of the campaign. He would bring a couple of people with him on the road at most. He didn't write an acceptance speech because he didn't expect to win. He didn't do a transition. He wanted to save the money. I'm not so sure he loves being president, frankly, and so that part of it is an unknown for me. Of course, the dynamic.
Who would, first of all?
Right. Well, yes, but especially not him. I mean, this is somebody who's
yeah.
used to flying around playing golf and hanging around with models.
Still doing that, by the way.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. That's true. But
did you read Michael Lewis's book where he wrote about the King of Egypt's phone call?
Oh, yes.
Oh, my God.
Walk Like an Egyptian. Yeah. And I love that song. The Bangles.
Yeah. I mean, but also, I think it was The Fifth Risk that was in. He talks about, the executive branch is still under, the Department of Energy, which he calls the Department of Nuclear Weapons, which he should, right? Mm-hmm. Rick Perry, who wanted to get rid of it. I mean, everything about this guy is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, but he was elected. I mean, that's so... It's a tough call.
That speaks to what we were talking about earlier, though, right?
Yeah.
People voted against Hillary.
Yeah. And in fact, I was one of the idiot pundits who thought that Trump could never win because I got sat down by a pollster who explained to me that it was mathematically impossible. And what they missed was that they thought the unfavorability ratings made it impossible for him to win. But 1 out of 5 of Trump's voters actively disapproved of him when they voted for him. They just hated Hillary more, and so that was the flaw in the analysis. And I think that could happen again. Frankly, I mean that's kind of
reminded me of that scene in Private Parts where they're saying, the guy's pig vomit is saying, how many people, how do people like him? How long do they listen? An hour. What about people that hate him? 2 hours.
Right. Exactly.
There's something about the fascination with him that the media, they weren't seduced. They gladly got in to report him because people loved it.
Oh, absolutely. I was with those crowds of reporters who were following him around, and we all talked about it. We all knew this guy's making us a lot of money, right? Like it was a thing that we discussed. The ratings are amazing. The clicks are amazing. What do we do about that? I mean, do we have an ethical obligation to pull back? And of course, the bosses didn't want that, right? They wanted more of it. So that was a confusing chapter in our history.
A buddy of mine is a senior editor down the Washington Post, and we ever have him on. He and Philip Bump, they both push back real hard when they're like saying he could win easily in this next election. And I'm looking at polls right now in those states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, even Ohio. It's purplish. Wisconsin looks blue. Michigan looks blue. We don't have a candidate yet. That's right. Like maybe if we could only run against him without a candidate, I think we would have a better chance than putting one up, right? I'm only half kidding there, But I mean, do you think that this next year? I mean, is impeachment? Is it a harbinger of good or bad?
Well, I think the conventional wisdom until recently would have been that impeachment would have hurt the general election process. I think that's why they didn't do it before. They must have had a change of heart about that, I would imagine, but I don't see it, frankly. I think if you asked 100 Americans, probably 60 of them don't love the idea of doing this through impeachment.
Although those numbers have come down now to to reflect almost the opposite.
Yeah, but there's a little bit of wish fulfillment, I think, in the way they ask the questions, and you never know whether that's going to be true over a long period of time. I just don't trust after 2016. I don't trust polls at all anymore, And I remember going to Trump rallies where there were 30,000 people and going to Clinton rallies where there were 5, and I should have paid more attention to that.
Well, yeah, it's like. And I look at Mueller. I look at let's use today as a good example for a metaphor. I think Mueller was candy corn, but I think Ukraine is more like Reese's cups. I think. Well, I mean, I like them better.
Okay, I see.
And I think people can understand the Ukraine thing, and especially because he admitted it. And I think they begin to see. Wait a second. Oh, so I get the quid pro quo. I get that thing, right? Yeah. Okay. Now a lot of people don't realize it's against the law. But for I think the Republicans that realize that, the senators and going back to their states when they run in 2020 or even 2022, depending on what happens this election, how do you not vote to convict somebody like that? You are a juror, and you're supposed to look at the facts in this, assuming that it does go to trial.
Except that Republicans have to worry about winning a Republican primary. So that's a completely different analysis even than a sort of general election thing. So if you're a Republican senator, you have to think, am I going to survive a primary if I cast a vote this way? And probably the answer is no. I mean, depending on where you are, there's not going to be many places where there's 60% of of Republican voters are going to be anti-Trump.
All right, hold that thought. When we come back, I want to ask you about how you write and how often, because I know a lot of people love to write. Obviously, you write a lot. You're not writing right now. You're talking to me.
No, I'm not. No, that's true.
And also, which candidate do you think from the Democrats is the one that offers the best chance? Again, Matt Taibbi, he's nice enough to join us here. He was in Berkeley yesterday, but you can find his book, Hate Incorporated, on Amazon or any place that they sell books, and that's all coming up next.
Chip Franklin on KGO 810.